On December 4th, 1985, 25-year-old Chicago resident writer and artist Peter Sotos was arrested by state authorities and charged with possession of child pornography, becoming the first person in the U.S. to be faced with such a charge, as the Illinois Child Pornography Act had just been instated the previous month. Sotos came to face this charge after it was discovered that one of his self-printed zines borrowed its cover from a photocopy of a magazine that contained such materials. Sotos pled guilty to possession of such materials, served his sentence, and was subsequently released. Details about his current life in regard to this incident are mostly unknown, but I presumed he is to remain in the sex offender registry for life. And what I do know is he's still writing today, although no incident like the one that landed him in prison has reoccurred, meaning that he has not reoffended. The zine in question that such an image was published in was volume 2 of his 3-volume production titled Pure, images of which I can't even really show you due to their graphic nature. The original prints and even the reprints of Pure are extremely expensive collector's items today, although scans can be found on the internet, obviously without any of the illegal images. Now, I was able to get a hold of such scans since, given the nature of this channel, I felt a morbid sense of duty to see what they were all about, if only so that no one else would have to. I knew them to be regarded by many as some of the sickest, most repulsive and disturbing work that 20th century literature has to offer, described as the scribblings of a madman attempting to collapse societal taste, something akin to a 20th century Marquis de Sade. Before I read them, I'd heard rumors around these disturbing and transgressive circles that Pure is it. It's the final frontier. Nothing can top the absolutely repellent and rotted nature of it. Of course, I had to read it. And I did. And, well, I'm still trying to figure out what this was all for. If it was even for anything. I guess that's what this video is really about. I'm trying to process things. The zines are self-described as follows. Pure exists for those who desire extremes and are tired of listening to and or acting like house pets. Pure satiates and encourages true lust. Pure exists for those who want it. So what exactly is the content of these zines? Well, in between badly scanned pictures of bondage, pornography, Holocaust documentation, and snapshots of murder victims, both before and after their demise, often presented alongside mugshots of their killers, Pure is riddled with editorial after editorial focusing on the real-life criminal feats of murderers, rapists, and war criminals, such as, to name a few, Ian Brady, Henry Lee Lucas, Richard Ramirez, etc., etc. Pure is actually, I guess, historically important in some way, in that it is the first instance of something akin to a careful and thorough printed documentation of serial killer lore. I mean, sure, works of true crime literature preceded it, but there had never really been anything quite like this curation of atrocities with such a specific and subjective focus on the perpetrators and their exploits and reasonings. And with true crime being such a popular topic nowadays and serial killer lore being constantly discussed in YouTube channels and podcasts and blogs, etc., it's hard to see the work of Pure as singular or original, but back in the mid-80s, it really was. There was nothing quite like it. The funny thing about Pure is, however, that unlike the treatments of serial killer lore that we see in entertainment media today, the acts being described in the zine are presented in a lauding and admiring way, not to mention in an ultra-explicit, detail-written, and relishing style, often calling the perpetrators geniuses and masters of their craft and describing murder and sexual assault as admirable and titillating feats, showcasing the victims as useless, as scum who deserved it, often referred to with expletives and racist slurs, and described only as stepping stones for their killers to achieve an ultimate glory. It sees these atrocities as signs of prowess, virility, and heroism, and with the perpetrators as the true supreme figures that humankind has to offer. Sounds pretty fucking edgy, doesn't it? Yes, Pure is exactly as advertised. It's a masturbatory and pornographic account of murder, atrocity, and mayhem, with the sole intent of catering to those who would find true interest and pleasure in this subject matter. And I don't mean in the way that someone like the average true crime fan would find interest and pleasure in it. I mean like in the way that someone longing to see these things play out or try them for themselves would find interest and pleasure in it. Or so the zine says. It is stately a work meant to please maniacs and outrage the rest of the populace for no express purpose other than existing as this abhorrent artifact. Now here's the question that just absolutely permeates my entire experience reading Sotos' work. Why? Why would I read this? Why was this made? Why is Sotos still read and praised today? I mean, there are many who see Sotos as just a sick pedophile who wrote these things to tickle his own pickle, sure, but he has many defenders and fans, mostly in forums that you should definitely get a VPN before visiting. NordVPN, please sponsor me. These defenders feel that there is true purpose and power behind his work. One such person being Dennis Cooper, whose work we have discussed and praised on this channel before. Many believe that Sotos' initial arrest was a setup, that he was unfairly prosecuted, and that his criminal activity was blown out of proportion due to the social and political climate of the time, namely the daycare sexual abuse hysteria of the year previous to his arrest, which of course gave rise to everyone's favorite satanic panic. Many see Sotos as a victim of extreme state-mandated censorship, as an outsider artist seeking to put free speech laws to the test, and showing the hypocrisy of the populace when confronted by such examples of things we should have the freedom to express, however disconcerting they might be. Of course, there's the fact that Sotos possessed actual illegal materials portraying such horrific abuse. I'm unable to find much defense of Sotos on this front. I wonder why. I mean, there's the question of whether he only possessed this material in order to reflect humanity's own cruelty and sickness back at them for the sake of art, or whether he possessed them because, well, he was into it. I mean, I don't know. God only knows. And I'm not even sure God is real, or at least has been real fucking quiet about this. I can at least assure you, the victims and families of victims of the images which he used are most likely not very happy with this asshole. Anyway, I'm sure you're all wondering where I stand on this debate. Is Sotos a misunderstood genius or just a sick little edgelord who takes things a little bit too far? The short answer is, I don't fucking know. These are the questions that I hope to tease out here, although admittedly, this video is going to be a bit of a mess, since a lot of these questions, given their overwhelming and unsavory nature, are difficult to tackle with much clarity and decisiveness. But as always, I hope to do my best. First, I should say, in regard to Sotos and his own intentions, seeking answers through this route was unbelievably exasperating. In every interview I could find, Sotos is always deliberately cagey and roundabout with his answers regarding his art, and it seems that this is his mission statement as an artist. Perhaps the most direct response that I could find from him regarding his work was an excerpt from his book, Comfort and Critique, in which he writes, "I'm absolutely sick of the differences between attention and interpretation. I want to create an art that is ideally shored, one that can't be misunderstood any longer. Not by the powers that want to see me jailed, or by the fucking mice that pretend I'm doing something socially significant." As clear-cut as possible, Sotos here states that seeking answers or an exegesis of some sort regarding his work is counterintuitive to the kind of reaction he wants to draw out. He seeks the purest reaction from his audience, only the visceral shock that his work provides, perhaps an admiration of how fringe and hideous it is. I would say, on that front, he definitely succeeds. I mean, Sotos' work provokes an unease for me, the way that few things ever have. Just having the scans in my computer makes me feel like I have to microwave my hard drive. It essentially feels like something extracted from depths that we seldom ever dare explore. This is why I feel that Sotos being named the modern-day Marquis de Sade feels particularly appropriate. There's a perceived lack of sanity in his work that is hard to shake off. very confrontational for the sole sake of pushing back against social tastes. It's a permanence of inappropriateness that I find in his work. Something that rekindles that childlike feeling that we're infringing upon rules that we are not meant to break. You know, like the dirty magazines that we hide under the bed that we feel wrong for owning, placing us back to that mind frame even as adults. But still, the promise of chaos and monstrosity is tantalizing, if only to reassure ourselves that no matter how low we go, there is a fearsome abyss that is always lower than us. That's what Pure is, and aims to be, as far as I'm concerned. It's a counterbalance to our comfort, and for us, an assurance that the monsters are at bay in a work as reviled as this. However, as with all art, analysis is hard to resist. So I'm sorry, Mr. Sotos, but I have to bring my academic bullshit into the mix, if only to make myself feel better. I guess I do think that Peter Sotos infuses much more meaning into his work than he might give himself credit for, or more than he might have intended. And I do feel that Pure touches certain nerves and provokes certain mental spasms that make it important, or at the very least, tremendously thought-provoking. For my own sake, I simply hope that this video lends some more nuance to what is otherwise perceived and dismissed as gross and sick frivolity, as that is and always has been the mission statement of this channel. Of course, that evaluation is valid. I mean, even encouraged by Sotos himself, it seems. And I will also touch upon that. But for now, let's go ahead and see what sense we can make of this, the alleged most disturbing work of the late 20th century. So let's start with something we're all very, very familiar with. Porn.
Glory, glory, lay it all on me. 50-foot freedom, 15,000. You bet, over, cast out, nova, no sweat. I'm clean, nothing can touch me. Hey, I'm the king of the world. You wanna hear my song? You come and measure me. I'm 20 inches long. Hey, I'm the king of the world. You wanna hear my song? You come and measure me.
So, Pure proclaims to exist for those who desire those extremes. I don't know why I did this with my hands. That's gross. This catering to a sinister desire is obvious in the way the zine is formatted. Long passages describing the sexual ecstasy derived from sexual violence, war crimes, and murder are adorned by crime scene photos depicting people axed to death, by pictures of children who became murder victims, autopsy photos of the same, and by hardcore bondage, all edited in like sinister, macabre centerfolds. There is even perceived intent in the way some of the photographs are organized, such as the instance in which a photograph of serial killer John Wayne Gacy is followed by bondage photography in the following page. Therefore, it's safe to say that Pure is mimicking the aesthetics and sensibilities of pornographic magazines. So let's start there. So what exactly is pornography? Pornography is a medium that, until recent years, has gone widely unacknowledged as worthwhile of attention within academic and cultural studies. Therefore, pornography is mostly defined by what it is not. It is not art, it is not tasteful, it is not dignified, valuable, or meaningful in any way. It is baseness incarnate. The closest to an aesthetic texturing that it received for many decades was when it was juxtaposed with its more tasteful and highly regarded counterpart, erotica. Famous American film producer Lucy Fisher once remarked, "Erotica is brunettes in silk. Pornography is blondes in nylon. Erotica is for nice middle-class literate people like us. Pornography is for the lonely, unattractive, and uneducated." Though at surface level, Fisher's remark might seem elitist and unnuanced, in fact, there's a deliberately snarky and dismissive tone in her statement that is actually quite useful as helping us define pornography in an artistic sense. Her remarks regarding class standing, scholarly elitism, and personal disposition really pinpoint how exactly we come to regard what pornography is. It is an exploitative, homing missile of stimulation. It makes zero gymnastics in our brain. It goes straight for the jugular. Or maybe it aims a little bit lower. Wink, wink. It is the base stimulation for the masses, as opposed to erotica, which aims to stimulate not just our sexual appetite, but our aesthetic appetite as well, our desire to know sex and the human body with veneration, which Fisher proclaims necessitates a certain sophistication in order to be truly appreciated. Pornography is a raw, artless endeavor with tonal vision. This is also why the word porn is usually tacked onto something to define it as a crude and effortless display of a particular kind of excess. Things like torture porn and misery porn denote that the work of art in question has shed its merits in favor of simply providing a certain kind of stimulation that feels one-dimensional. This is apparently the power of pornography. Pornography is also, of course, highly perceived as a criminal and corrosive endeavor. It is the reason why such a thing as obscenity laws have historically existed. The violation of that tenuous boundary between erotica and pornography has caused many works of art to come into question and scrutiny under the law. Perhaps most notably in the case of D.H. Lawrence's 1928 novel, Lady Chatterley's Lover, which, because of an extensive trial regarding its merits and intents as a work of art, was actually not published unedited in the United Kingdom until 1960. The book was also banned in the US, Canada, Australia, among many other countries. The reason? Well, it contained passages depicting explicit sexual activity in a way that led many to question whether or not it was mere pornography. Of course, the novel had its many defenders who championed freedom of artistic expression and saw its censoring as unjust. Curiously, however, the grounds under which it was defended were never posed as a defense for pornography. The arguments were to actually save Lady Chatterley's Lover from being described as such, to show that it was more than simple pornography. Thus, even in the world of free artistic expression, pornography is always something to avoid, an area where art goes to wilt and die. In academia today, we still see the same constant arguments to defend works of art. In order for art to be valid, it must be proven to pass this unspoken test that it is more than mere porn. Pornography is never allowed full entry into artistic consideration, and even if something does have airs or angles of pornography, in order for it to function as an artistic endeavor, it must always have something else to it. Otherwise, it is not worth the thought and engagement. Pornography is entirely jettisoned from critical consideration. However, if all of this is true, then it begs the question: if pornography is so culturally reviled, so aesthetically unpleasing, so sordid in its approaches that no one will even give it the time of day, then why the fuck is it so popular? Pornography is universally reviled, it seems, but also universally consumed. It is one of, if not the most searched and viewed things on the internet. It is an incredibly lucrative industry. Most people in the world have consumed it, and yet these very ideas make many people uneasy, even though the people that publicly and vociferously denounce it probably also consume it behind closed doors. I'm willing to bet a big portion of the people watching this video right now will not let their parents look at their search history as it is right now. And conversely, and I know this is fucking putrid, but you'll have to bear with me, the case might be the same with the parents. Sorry. Pornography is this big open secret in our culture. It doesn't matter if one consumes it only occasionally, or very rarely, or every day. In the eyes of propriety, all of these are equally wrong. There's no proper way to consume it, but this obviously doesn't stop anyone. Whatever the reasons behind this revulsion might be, whether it's because of those who believe that a porn addiction is a harmful thing, although in case you didn't know, this kind of addiction has been proven to not really be real, or whether it's to protect the children, which we all know is a famous phrase that often leads to bigoted censorship, see Anita Bryant, or whatever else. The truth of the matter is, moral and artistic standing does a lot to hide and dismiss pornography, but does almost nothing to stop it. Why? Well, I think it's because pornography is just too powerful. It's too encompassing of our desires, too direct in its way of addressing the masses, as Lucy Fisher said in that quote I read earlier. It has an ever-present demand, an unmissable purpose, and an almost unerring way of achieving that purpose. Therefore, most of the powers that would weigh it down fail, and so the next best step is to ignore or denounce it. But what happens when certain critical thinkers dare to approach and unearth exactly what pornography implies culturally and aesthetically? Well, there is one figure in American cultural criticism specifically who did such a thing, and the results of her observations and conclusions were perceived in quite a chaotic fashion, to say the least. This figure was Andrea Dworkin. Although Dworkin had an expansive body of work in which she examined a wide range of cultural phenomena through her radical feminist lens, today she is most remembered, or rather most reviled, as this crazy, belligerent woman who gave feminism a bad name and tried to take precious porn away from us. Indeed, throughout her activism career, Dworkin campaigned for the criminalization of pornography, often working in tandem with right-wing activists who sought the same goals, although for different reasons and through different means. Of course, as we all know, Dworkin ultimately failed in her goal, which was seen as a decisive defeat against her philosophy. In the liberal conscience today, she is often perceived as a harmful, misandrist figure, and even as a figure totally opposed to what true feminism is. So why did Dworkin want pornography gone? The entirety of her views on the subject were laid out in her 1981 book, Pornography: Men Possessing Women. Here, Dworkin explores the subject of violence as it pertains to the experience of producing and viewing pornography. Through a series of examples drawing from history and cultures from around the world, Dworkin theorizes that pornography has the capacity to subject women to the utmost levels of torture, humiliation, and dehumanization, all for the sake of male pleasure, and to have it go unquestioned, because the simple-minded nature of pornography disavows any kind of nuance. A large portion of her argument is centered on the fact that this violence, this dynamic dehumanization, is vastly ignored by leftist politics, because female sex politics are a big blind spot for a lot of cultural and political thinkers, precisely because pornography is often ignored or dismissed as a frivolous, one-track-minded affair, unworthy of consideration. In Dworkin's rhetoric, pornography becomes a kind of blinder, a veneer that protects those violent and misogynistic impulses from being seen for what they truly are. This is, according to her, another useful power of pornography: to turn the wickedness of violence and hatred into a desirable commodity and spectacle. As Dworkin writes, "Capitalism is not wicked or cruel when the commodity is the whore. Profit is not wicked or cruel when the alienated worker is a female piece of meat. Corporate bloodsucking is not wicked or crude when the corporations in question sell cunt. Racism is not wicked or cruel when the black cunt or yellow cunt or red cunt or Hispanic cunt or Jewish cunt has her legs splayed for any man's pleasure. Poverty is not wicked or cruel when it is the poverty of dispossessed women who have only themselves to sell. Violence by the powerful against the powerless is not wicked or cruel when it is called sex. Slavery is not wicked or cruel when it is sexual slavery. Torture is not wicked or cruel when the tormented are women, whores, cunts. The new pornography is left-wing, and the new pornography is a vast graveyard where the left has gone to die. The left cannot have its horse and its politics too." Essentially, as it boils down, and as Dworkin herself stated, to quote her, "Any violation of a woman's body can become sex for men." This is the essential truth of pornography. This is a calamitous conclusion as it pertains to the realm of unbridled pleasure that pornography caters to. As Dworkin proposes, pornography is divorced from critical thought because its implications are far too unsavory for us to handle, and because those thinkers in charge of processing this cultural baggage, who are mostly men, simply do not care to see it any other way. Porn denies a voice, denies nuance and thought. It can be as crass and denigrating as it wants to be. This is the nature of its craft. so much in porn titles, for example, and porn premises, is a fetishized extreme of violence and dehumanization, and yet it often goes completely unquestioned, because porn is not so serious, because it only speaks to a section of our brain that we have to trust is completely corralled off from the rest of our thoughts and impulses. This, Dworkin argues, is a very treacherous trust. Now, of course, the counter-arguments would state that pornography is mere fantasy. It's a place where these kinds of violent impulses can be aired out in a safe and consensual way. In fact, many of Dworkin's critics were women who called themselves feminist and who viewed her claims as reductive of the female experience and a woman's ability to have agency over her own pleasures and sexuality. Indeed, Dworkin's writing and conclusions are unapologetic and clear-cut, straightforward in their condemnation of the more sinister edge one can glean from bondage, objectification, and violent hardcore pornography. Today, as I said, the debate is no longer up for discussion. Pornography is not going anywhere. It is a much more massive industry than it has ever been, and indeed, as a counter-argument to a lot of Dworkin's claims, many female film producers and feminists have taken the reins of the industry and shown that healthy, feminist-conscious pornography can be produced. And the discussion around adult film actresses' rights and protections have largely expanded since Dworkin's time. However, to me, Dworkin's side of the argument also greatly persists. Now, in 2022, when there's been a large reevaluation of her work and claims, as well as a critique of her approaches, especially her siding with right-wing activists and censors, the consensus seems to be, and it is a consensus that I personally subscribe to, although not all pornography is inherently bad, pornography can still be bad. And when it's bad, it can get really bad. What many don't mention about Dworkin's activism is that, however unnuanced, however one-dimensional certain remarks she made might have been perceived as, she was really lending a voice and shedding a light to corners of the entertainment industry where there had previously been none. One such instance was when she offered a platform and legal support to adult film star Linda Borman, who was then famous for her appearance in the adult film Deep Throat. 8 years after her appearance in the film, Borman made statements revealing that her ex-husband and talent agent Chuck Traynor had beaten and raped her and violently coerced her into participating in pornographic films. Borman was unable to press any charges due to the statute of limitations on such assaults, and Dworkin's Women Against Pornography organization was the only organization to extend support to Borman and her plight. This was only one case in a long unearthed history of the abuse and exploitation that continues to go on in the adult film and sex work industries. Today, I don't think there's any doubts left that pornography has left a big, ugly mark on humanity, and that its powerful catering to desire has led to some of the most shocking and infuriating cases of exploitation and dehumanization in modern history. Now we know that sex trafficking is a very real thing that affects hundreds of thousands of people in the world, mostly women, and we know of the close ties that this criminal behavior has with the production of pornography. In a post-Weinstein, post-Epstein world, there is no doubt left that the dynamics of submission, dehumanization, and objectification are married to the entertainment history in surreptitious and highly damaging ways. And we know that pornography is central to the way that violence is enacted upon people, primarily women, simply to cater to someone else's pleasure, usually men's. We know that there's an inherent racism to the way porn is produced and marketed, although for some reason this fact only makes us giggle or shake our heads without much outrage, because it is the context of pornography that debilitates these evaluations of dangerous racial and misogynistic dynamics. Perhaps pornography provides a safe space to air out these maladies, but it also most definitely provides a space where they're allowed to fester and worsen. Alright, I know what you're thinking. Juan, what the fuck are you talking about? I thought this was a video about Pure by Peter Sotos. What's all this porn shit about? What the fuck does Andrea Dworkin have to do with Sotos? Well, everything. Do you know who was a big follower of Dworkin and of her writing? That's right, Peter Sotos. During a 2006 interview with thefanzine.com, when asked what kind of literary tradition he envisioned himself in, Sotos stated, "There are writers whose work I love, of course, and it's nice when some people make certain smallish comparisons. Sod, Dworkin, but nothing in terms of an ongoing tradition. I think Andrea Dworkin cared very deeply about her words being more than that, just words. I'm certain that I do as well. But we don't see the frustrating impossibilities of that action in the same context or toward the same result." This intent towards reaching an unmistakable truth is something that Sotos often expressed, like in that quote by him that I read earlier, where he speaks of that desire to bridge over intention and interpretation. Dworkin also wrote about this desire often, this intent to reach an audience and unmistakably get her point across regarding the nature of violence against women and the violence enacted by pornography. She made this point very clear, for instance, in her pseudo-autobiography, Mercy, in which she wrote of her own personal experiences as a sex worker and victim of sexual assault, which led to her unequivocally pinpointing and denouncing the nature of this violence and woman-hating that she came to also witness all across culture and media. Empowered by this need to identify the violence no one else seemed to see and have it be clear in everyone's minds as well, for everyone to be attuned to the monstrous nature of it. As she wrote, "I will fill you with remorse because you fucked me to ground meat and because you buy it and you sell it, and the hole in my heart is commerce to you." This sentiment, if you recall, is also in a twisted way also Sotos' mission statement in Pure, although for a very different purpose and to a very different effect. The commonality between both of these authors is that they both seek truth and both operate under the realization that pornography represents this truth, something so raw and surmounting that most thinkers avoid its implications entirely. Dworkin works this idea to critique its moral failings, but Sotos does so to weaponize it. As even the name Pure implies, Sotos pines to encounter the purest form of unbridled deviant pleasure and own it to its most powerful degree. Sotos' work seeks to embody pornography. He does not put any other name to his work, and does not mask the zine's intent or call the violence in his work something else. It is laid bare, direct, and impossible to miss, which we have discussed is the power of pornography and the reason that gets it banned from being referred to as art. To quote the zine again, "Pure satiates and encourages true lust, and it exists for those who want it." The word true in that description is particularly salient. It caters to a certain kind of desire and lust that we like to tell ourselves no one really possesses, but which we cannot ignore, most definitely exists. We know that there are rapists in the world. We know that there are people who see women, who see people of color, who see other humans generally as scum, as toys meant only to satiate their pleasure. We know that murderers exist and often operate between being members of society and cruel, cold-blooded monsters seamlessly. We know that child predators exist. The history of war unignorably exists to show us what humanity is truly capable of. We know we are not innocent, and Sotos knows this too, and he knows that all of this can be translated into the language of pornography, exploited, commercialized, sold, and used as a form of expression, and that it is all a symptom of what Dworkin described in her work. Sotos seeks to construct a clear picture of what Dworkin reviled, and for it to work its power on readers in unignorable ways. Whether one reads it to be titillated or aroused, God forbid, or to be repulsed and disturbed, nonetheless, we can all universally recognize its language, its coding. Because it emulates pornography, anyone can recognize what it is truly about. And that is, of course, a scary fucking thought to have. In short, Pure is pornography at its rawest. If pornography is no frills entertainment, then Pure is no frills pornography. It's a step beyond. It reaches deep into the core of what desire and lust of this kind truly cater to, a sense of power. Power over other people, power over society, the power to objectify and to turn that objectification into sexual pleasure, exactly the same way as Dworkin described pornography. So now we arrive at the second question of this video. What is such power? How can we define it? How does it manifest around us? And what exact kind of power is pure tapping into? Well, in order to define such a horrific and uncomfortable concept, let's turn to the beloved 1983 comedy starring Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd, Trading Places. With apologies to Eddie Murphy, let's go ahead and use Trading Places in order to make more sense of Peter Sotos. Trading Places was released in 1983, a year before Pure saw its first publication, and if my small background in film and media studies is correct, then that is reason enough to suspect that they are bred from the same ecosystem and resonate with each other in deeper ways than we might initially think. Also, I'm going to be big time spoiling the movie here, so be warned. Yes, spoiler warning for Trading Places in this Peter Sotos discussion. What the fuck is this video? Is anyone still watching? Trading Places is about a bet placed between the two elderly Duke brothers, millionaires who are bored out of their minds and have nothing better to do. The Duke brothers muse about the nature versus nurture debate and wonder if two people at different extremes of the social ladder could essentially exchange lives seamlessly. To test this, they choose white millionaire Louis Winthorpe and black street hustler Billy Ray Valentine as their test subjects, orchestrating Louis' fall from grace and the loss of all his status and assets, while assuring that Valentine replaces him and becomes a new millionaire in his place. Their plan works out great, showing that indeed it is money and opportunity that make or break a person, but they soon grow bored of their bet and decide to return Valentine to the streets, but with no intention of reinstating Winthorpe to his former glory, essentially leaving the two in ruin. Winthorpe and Valentine, however, become an unlikely team, aided by Ophelia, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, a sex worker who Winthorpe befriended while living in the streets, and the three devise a plan to ruin the Duke brothers, giving them a taste of their own medicine while making themselves filthy rich in the process. The plan, which involves traveling to the savage carnage of Wall Street and cornering the stock market while spoiling the Duke brothers' plans to do the same, works, and the Duke brothers go bankrupt, and Winthorpe, Valentine, and Ophelia spend the rest of their days vacationing and living the good life, and all that good stuff. All under the seeing and watchful eye of everyone's favorite president, Ronald McDonald. The end.
Bruh. So this is me right now editing this video, and I swear I didn't even notice that I called Ronald Reagan Ronald McDonald. That wasn't even a joke. It just fucking slipped my mind. What the fuck?
Trading Places is an essential film, in my opinion, for understanding power in its social sense and the way that it is represented in entertainment. Trading Places is everything to do with power, violence, and more importantly, the way this language of violence and submission is translated into a pleasurable journey of justice and vindication. The film has this very strange dynamic of playing up the qualities of power and domination to comedic and pleasurable effect, while at the same time making no denouncement of the great pain and ruin that they bring. Throughout the film, after the Duke brothers show that they completely dominate Winthorpe's life financially and can undo it in the snap of a finger, we see the chaos and ruin and near fatalness that this entails for Winthorpe. The film shows us the life of struggle and artificial poverty entails for a person. And for all intents and purposes, not to get too Marxist, but we can get a little bit Marxist. Under an economic system, all poverty is artificial. We see Winthorpe living in the streets, struggling to stay alive, falling into a deep alcoholism, and culminating in attempted suicide. In a comedy, we recognize the power structure here. It's total domination, total overpowering, a taste for violent lust that the Dukes relish. That sounds familiar. However, the film presents no real clear denouncement of these lusts, and no alarm call to have these dynamics questioned or dismantled. Instead, the film presents us the idea that the only effective way to counterbalance this kind of overwhelming aggression is to enact it on someone else, to take hold of this power and make it beneficial for yourself. As I explained, Valentine and Winthorpe, having known the true bleakness of being overpowered, impoverished, and left to die, make no realization that the economic social system they're part of is cruel to those it marginalizes. Instead, they have a valuable realization that there is a clear way in which to weaponize this system in order to benefit themselves and have their enemies submit to them. All of this, the film plays out before us in order to make the experience of power and domineering pleasurable and just, even desirable. I mean, we want to be in the position that Winthrop and Valentine find themselves in the end, even after having seen the kind of damage the opposite side of things can do to a person. In fact, one of the Duke brothers has a heart attack in the end when he finds out he has gone bankrupt. We understand that the other brother will be thrown out into the streets, face the same coldness, difficulty, perhaps even be driven to suicide the way Winthrop almost was. The point of the film is that we don't care. I mean, this is a comedy after all. And perhaps the most disconcerting thing of it all is not that this is a comedy, but that such subject matter can easily be turned comedic. We are conditioned, after all. We are attuned to the pleasure of power, to its desirability, and entirely divorced from its consequences. It's easy to see how this can be a comedy, and a pretty good one, if I may say so myself. I mean, I'm not immune by any means. It's hilarious, it's touching, the payoff is satisfying, the characters are undeniably likable, especially Eddie Murphy's, and yet that undercurrent is there. You know, that undeniable implication that we are witnessing this cruel power exchange, leaving considerable casualties in its wake. In short, the language that we see in Trading Places is the same language of violence and submission that we see in Pure, yet Trading Places goes a step beyond. By making it into a highly palatable, enjoyable commercial film, the movie suggests that this language is highly predominant and recognizable in our society, and more than that, it suggests that it can also be pleasurable in the sense of mass appeal. Let's just read back that prepping monologue that Winthrop gives to Valentine as they are about to enter the pit of the stock market and its brutal savagery. Think big, think positive, never show any signs of weakness. Always go for the throat. Buy low, sell high. Fear, that's the other guy's problem. Nothing you have ever experienced can prepare you for the unbridled carnage you're about to witness. The Super Bowl, the World Series, they don't know what pressure is. In this building, it's either kill or be killed. You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. And then, of course, Eddie Murphy's character expertly and succinctly summarizes the entire ordeal and sentiment. We gotta kill them, motherfuckers. Now let's compare that to an excerpt from Peter Sotos' zines, which, against all judgment, I find necessary to at least give you a small dose of. Granted, I did censor it a little bit, just because there are things in it that I really don't want to utter on camera, but just know that this is from a piece called Kitty Torture. Yeah, this specifically is detailing the grief and pain of the family of one of serial killer Ian Brady's victims. Just as Mrs. Downey's pain is enjoyable to recall, so too is the image of her eyeing the pictures Brady took of her daughter. Her mind's eye switches from lovely cradle portraits to naked torture pornography. Her pain is extreme and deliciously titillating for us all. Trading Places is set in public streets, in mansions, in Wall Street, in the dignified corporate world of Philadelphia and the financial district of New York City. It is seemingly as divorced from the grimy, deviant, and monstrous perversity that could have bred a thing like Pure. Yet in these two passages, are we not essentially witnessing the same thing? They are both about turning submission and dehumanization into a pleasurable experience. The difference is really just in how tasteful and appealing each one is for the broader population. As we know from what the film shows, the effects are largely the same. Ruin, brutality, death, and the Duke brothers' ruin even promises the same kind of titillation Sotos describes. Titillation described from the extreme pain of the receptor of such violence, from being submitted to the same kind of power. Trading Places shows us the benefits of this victimization, how in a socially proper way there are things to gain and enjoy from it. Pure, however, although dancing around this same kind of titillation, also never lets us forget the victims quite like the film does. In Pure, they are front and centered, photographed, and ruined for our eyes to behold. As we know, one is pornography, the other isn't, But even though the vehicle and the obstacles along the way are largely different, the destinations for both Pure and trading places seem not at all different. They gesture towards reaching that gratifying power trip, though one's violence is more invisible, more complex and palatable than the other. What does this mean then? The realization here is that human appetites are markedly more sinister than we perhaps give them credit for. One thing to not forget is that nothing in Sotos' zines is a creation of his own. The photographs that he includes, even the illegal ones, are scans from other publications, showcasing the actions of others, and were photographed and commodified by someone else. Even the writing, though speculating on the pleasures that the perpetrators must have felt, is simply echoing lusts and desires that are felt by these perpetrators and their supporters in the first place. It is ready-made violence from the endless fountain that is the world. Pure is simply a patchwork of atrocity, its cruelty borrowed and sampled from elsewhere, its anthologized violence. While possibly not in a deliberate manner, as Sotos would want to convince us, nonetheless there is a prevalence here of an undeniable pathos towards the victims. Sotos, although reframing it as a source of pleasure, nonetheless portrays grief and suffering enacted upon others as a prevalent factor of violence. The world at large would want to convince us that this grief and suffering are non-existent. Trading places would want to convince us that it is only the gratifying pleasures gained from this violence that are important for fulfillment. Yet Sotos suggests that this is not the case, that cruelty is essential to our sense of comforting power. The kind of unintentional praxis that Pure enacts upon our minds is realizing that monstrosity is not separate from humanity. It is merely commodified, cosmeticized, roughly shaped into something that befits our definition of humanity, but when it is turned pornographic and unwieldy as it is in Pure, it gives us a chance to recognize its true calamity. Just think, have you ever wanted to kill someone? Have you ever wanted to punch someone, or just take revenge, just ruin somebody? Maybe you just thought of it, maybe in jest. Maybe you've jokingly said to a friend or a loved one, I could fucking kill you right now. Of course, the vast majority of us would never act on it, but the sentiment lingers, like the vague ghost of aggression that haunts us all from time to time. Now let's think a bit more broadly. Are we aware of how exploitative labor brings us comfort and commodities? Yeah, right? I mean, most of us are. We all know that there's children starving somewhere. We all know that the way that our electronics and clothing are made is probably not so chill. We feel powerless to stop it, however, and have no necessary pause from enjoying the fruits of this labor. So the most that we can do is usually just say, well, tough shit. With Pure, we can no longer deny this violence, but we also fail to recognize a lot of it in ourselves, no matter how similar it is to many of our impulses. I'm not saying this is due to our hypocrisy or denial either. I do think that we are right in denouncing the things we see in Pure, of course. I do think that many of us are genuinely and sincerely divorced from the taste in power and violence that Pure seeks to cater to. However, what I am gesturing towards is that there is a little bit of that putrid little je ne sais quoi in all of us, both in the recognition of how this power plays into our sexual gratification, as Dworkin explains, but also in our social gratification, as trading places entertains us with. We do want to hurt others in an unspoken and glorified sense, whether it is in a roundabout way or not, whether we want a promotion at work and it means crushing someone else's dreams of getting it, whether we want to cut someone off on the freeway for being a dickwad, whether we want to seek pleasure in bed with a loved one, and the way to achieve that is to get a bit spicier, a bit rougher, whether we want control and power in any way, there's a facet of Pure running in the way everything around us and within ourselves is codified. Pure reveals that the appetite and the lust for this is there, nascent in a lot of ways, and it's only a matter of how the wires cross in certain people. We can denounce and revile it, rightfully so, but we can also recognize it, even in something like a comedy. And that notion, that revelation, that there is an edge of perversity in everything we do, is truly powerful and vertiginous. As I said, we retreat, we revile, we alienate pure from ourselves, and that is a utility of the work as well. Pure works to make us feel pure. That is not just clever wordplay, though. I couldn't resist. As I stated earlier in this crazed rambling, pure is widely recognized as the bottom of the barrel. You know, it's the one creation that is truly abject from every sense of propriety and humanity. It is brutality and depravity incarnate, and that helps us recognize ourselves by knowing what we are not. It makes us feel unalienated from the sense of decency that holds us together. However, what we often don't realize is that this very action is a form of power as well. The power to hold ourselves separate from the pain of others. Beholding captured violence is a multifaceted action. Pure operates on this action, on the idea that we are gazing at and staring pain and violence in the face. Every image in Pure is a photograph, a captured snippet of reality, posed and staged by journalists, documentarians, porn directors, criminals, etc. And we watch it, and we assign an emotional reaction to it, choosing a path, whether it is to be titillated, as Sotos hopes, or absolutely repulsed and outraged, as the rest of humanity hopes. Now, what can we make of this regarding of violence? Well, famed American writer and cultural critic Susan Sontag had a lot to say about this mental process. In fact, she wrote an entire book on it, which was a follow-up to her famous work titled On Photography, which detailed the dynamics and artistic sublimation behind the act of photographing. In this follow-up regarding the pain of others, Sontag focused specifically on wartime photography, depicting violence, death, torn cities, and what the experience of regarding these photographs reveals about ourselves and the way in which we consume media. Appropriately, like in Sontag's book, Pure also deals with wartime photography, albeit in a very different sense than the one we're used to experiencing such photography in. You see, Pure showcases the atrocities committed within concentration camps towards the end of World War II, but expressly states that the purpose of their inclusion is to dispel the narrative as it is told from the victims' perspectives, and instead, as you probably guessed, takes the time to praise the actions and feats of the soldiers who committed such unspeakable barbarities in a piece titled Nazi Triumphs. Now, of course, this is fucking gross to those of us who understand history, crimes against humanity, and injustice, but perhaps the most compelling movement that Sotos orchestrates here is that this piece is almost entirely composed of uncaptioned photographs. He's not constantly spewing his anti-Semitic rhetoric down our throats. He lets the photos speak for themselves. The sole preamble offered to us is that this piece is an effort to, quote, firstly give an accurate account of the ingenuity and extreme taste that the Nazi Schutzstaffel operated under. Of course, the depraved subjectivity here is apparent, but the curious thing is that Sotos claims to show us an accurate account, and the most accurate account that can ever be offered, according to the zine's philosophy, is through photography. As Sontag explains, while photographs seemingly capture moments in time with undeniable veracity, the intent of photography, the actual truth that they disclose to our subjective minds, is slippery, mutable, and also potentially dangerous, depending on how the truth behind the image is skewed or manipulated. And this power to twist and bend truth with images lies mostly with those who present it. When describing the passions and nationalist convictions involved in presenting wartime photography specifically, Sontag writes, "To those who are sure that right is on one side, oppression and injustice on the other, and that the fighting must go on, what matters is precisely who is killed and by whom. To the militant, identity is everything, and all photographs wait to be explained or falsified by their captions. During the fighting between the Serbs and Croats at the beginning of the recent Balkan Wars, the same photographs of children killed in the shelling of a village were passed around at both Serb and Croat propaganda briefings. Alter the captions, and the children's deaths could be used and reused." The photography of pain seemingly only exists to serve one purpose: to outrage. Sontag, however, is here exemplifying how captured pain does not just provoke indignance, sympathy, and outrage. Quite the opposite, it can become highly manipulative, iconography, and this all depends on what context and for what purpose such an image is being presented to us. Now, I can only imagine that the same photographs that Sotos scanned for his zine were also used in history textbooks, in works that denounced the barbarity of Nazi officials, the lack of human compassion, in a way to use this captured pain to move us and to urge us to consider the humanity of the victims. Sotos, however, in his shitty little diatribe, is exemplifying that this is only one way in which the same photograph can be used. Just how Sontag explains how the narrative behind the photography used during the Balkan Wars could be highly altered and manipulated, so too Pure shows that the real power of observing and processing pain and atrocity lies within the curator and the recipient. Pure is about beholding and lusting after violence and abuse for whoever might be disposed to do such a horrific thing. However, Pure seeks to do this through images that were captured by others. Therefore, as Sontag urges in her writing, we have to consider, are the photographers themselves not at least a bit complicit in this lust? Are they not also abusing victims in a roundabout but detectable way? Let's go back to the famous quote from Sontag's On Photography, one that I have used previously in a review of Todd Kiesling's Scanlines, but which feels incredibly appropriate for describing Pure as well. To photograph people is to violate them, by seeing them as they never see themselves, by having knowledge of them that they can never have. It turns people into objects that can be symbolically possessed. Just as a camera is a sublimation of the gun, to photograph someone is a subliminal murder. A soft murder appropriate to a sad, frightened time. Pure really does accentuate this sense that the murder and abuse victims showcased in the zine are being murdered and abused twice over, or an infinite amount of times, by anyone looking to behold and objectify their pain, and turn it into a symbol for them to digest, process, and interpret. And the smoking gun for this second torrent of pain comes from the photographer, from the person who sees pain and thinks, I must capture that, I must own that, I must use that for a purpose, for an end that is mine to dictate. Sotos is only complicit in arranging the pain for his own depraved purpose. The actual source of such photographed pain is journals, textbooks, and other artists' lenses. Although not their intention, those who produce such media have created more pain for their subjects through the act of photographing, and this is a dynamic of pain making that we simply grow to accept. Of course, such photography doesn't always have a negative effect. In fact, there have been many instances throughout history in which photography has saved lives, revealed injustices that would have otherwise gone unnoticed, and shown the world through a new lens that felt important, necessary, and even revolutionary. However, the fact remains that to photograph and disclose pain also opens the gates to a torrent of depravity and misuse, and this power to skew and taste another's pain in the most perverse of ways is one that is most definitely not to be taken lightly. A real-life example that comes to mind for me is the reason behind why YouTube has such strict rules behind videos depicting children. Parents, most of who had only the best intentions for recording their children living their regular lives, did not realize that these videos, although born from innocent and loving intentions, nonetheless open the floodgates for predators to behold their children on this very platform in a very, very different sense. You can just imagine. That is the dissonant and mutable nature of photography that Sontag writes about. Capture an instance, commodify it, make it public and open, and even the apparent objectivity of a captured image becomes a field for potential monstrosity. I mean, in an objective sense, a video of a child is just a video of a child, but the direction in which a spectator can take this experience of beholding is dangerously multifaceted, and the parents hold responsibility in knowing what exactly photographing and recording can represent. Now let's set another clear example. In one of my many late-night explorations of the internet, I came across a subreddit which is actually quite popular titled Justice Porn. There's that word again. The posts in this subreddit are littered with violence. It's people getting punched, run over, beaten to a pulp, sometimes even fucking killed. However, what makes this subreddit so gratifying and pleasurable for audiences is that the receptor of this violence is usually someone who is judged as absolutely deserving of it. It's usually an asshole, a thief, a potential murderer, etc. And the violence is a form of release. It's a form of justice enacted. Therefore, even if the actions depicted in these videos are almost as atrocious as something that could find itself cataloged in pure, the pleasure falls on the side of justice, of the morally sound, because pain and punishment bring us relief when we know that it is being enacted for the benefit of taste and propriety. Pure then shows us that the nature of abuse is ingrained in media in ways that we might otherwise not consider. Pure is the hellscape to which media and iconography go to be splayed and bled. It is difficult for many of us to see the nature of this depravity and the way that it can destabilize all of the visual media that we consume, because placing ourselves into that depraved mindset is not an easy thing to do. Like with YouTube videos depicting children, I think it is genuinely difficult for many of us to have an idea of how such a thing can be perverted until it is too late. However, this shift in the regarding of pain is much more blatant in other facets of media. For instance, let's turn back to the reference I made earlier regarding Pure standing as the first publication dealing with serial killer lore. This parallels the genre of true crime very closely, of course, which deals with similar subject matter. However, true crime is a much more tasteful and sanitized version than what we see in Pure. Just the same, it's about murder, abuse, and pain, but it is able to effectively polish these elements into pleasure for the masses, as its standing as an ever-growing, lucrative form of media makes evident. If the dissonance behind the nature of photography and media wasn't clear before, then just think. True crime exemplifies how real pain and suffering can provoke other things than outrage in us. Sure, the experience of consuming true crime can heavily involve outrage, but it is certainly not the sole reason why people continue to consume it. There's intrigue, there's fascination, maybe a survivalist intent in there as well, and true crime can be turned into an exhilarating, entertaining, and even humorous experience. It's the thrill of experiencing others' pain that continually makes us tune in, because experiencing the pain of others can be a gratifying spectacle. And even though that statement would make most of us clutch our pearls, all evidence points to the fact that this is the crude reality behind a lot of media. Now, why is pain such a dissonant voice in media? I mean, pain is bad. This we know. So how is it so multifaceted in our eyes? Well, according to Elaine Scarry in her book, The Body in Pain, The Making and Unmaking of the World, it is because pain is a highly fractured and difficult language. Scarry explains how pain is incredibly difficult to communicate to others via words and images because it is solely a personal experience. An individual's pain is a sensibility enacted by the self upon the self. Love and adoration are a two-way street, and so are hate and sadness. These are things born within us, but they are for or because of outside factors. And although pain may be caused by external circumstances, the pain stays only within us. It is not shared. It does not bring connection, only a severed, lonesome agony. Though we all feel pain, we all feel pain uniquely. Pain is an individual language that only the self is fluent in. As Scarry puts it, to have great pain is to have certainty. To hear that another person has pain is to have doubt. We can only be sure of the pain that we ourselves feel. The pain of others is always a mystifying, confusing ordeal, an echo of something that we think we know, but which can never truly speak sincere words to us. With the added chaos of experiencing the pain of others through the detachment of media and photography, pain becomes only a vague impression, a crude pantomime of the true visceral calamity it is trying to showcase. Most of us will thankfully never experience as great a pain as the one we see in works like Pure. Therefore, the pain in Pure can only be muffled and abstract. It cannot truly reach us, and Sotos knows this, and knows that this tenuous connection we have with pain can be exploited and turned into pleasure for those who are wholly detached from humaneness. The closest that those of us who are decent and compassionate beings can do in terms of forming a relationship from pain is to have sympathy. However, is sympathy really an effective counterbalance to the depravity that we see in Pure? So far we've been discussing how dangerous the pain of others can be when in the hands of the depraved souls that Sotos hopes to please with his zine. However, what of the other crowd? The one that you and I hopefully belong to. We're able to comfortably denounce these actions and place ourselves in the side of the just, who can feel sympathetic towards all the pain being documented. We are in the playing field where the pornography of Pure doesn't reach us, and even if certain tastes of the power dynamics it deploys might echo with us in other ways, we know with absoluteness that we are not depraved, and that we do not derive pleasure from the pain of others. Or do we? The most visceral reaction that Pure might evoke in those of us who do not possess the sick and deranged lust it caters to is compassion. However, as seemingly altruistic and benign emotions as they might seem, aren't compassion and sympathy still in many ways just highly self-serving and self-gratifying emotions to have? Returning once more to Sontag's work, she says of compassion, "Compassion is an unstable emotion. It needs to be translated into action, or it withers." Much like the nature of images, the nature of our reaction is highly volatile. We are conditioned to think of our adverse reaction to pain and suffering as a form of virtue, yet the most compassion can do is completely shut us out from really understanding someone else's pain, unless it mobilizes us to truly understand the nature and source of it. Pure, of course, dares us, and by its mere existence also somewhat encourages us to be outraged and show sympathy to the people who are victims of such cruel abuse. And then, of course, laughs in the face of this sympathy, because Sotos is like a really fucking twisted dude. However, in a sense, by rejecting Pure and denouncing its evils, Sotos is also enabling us, the good guys, to gain a form of lustful pleasure from reading it, just as he would those who relish pain in a compassionless way. Pure, then, is not just porn for those who seek it, but also in a way for those who revile it. It erects our moral high ground to stand even taller, and it makes us feel a sympathy for victims that is only there to make us feel more comfortable in our lives. Atrocity and sympathy comfort us. They assure us that we are still human, that we are still on the right side, separate from that which is abject. But sympathy does next to nothing for the receptor of the violence we are spectating. As stated before, that violence is already congealed in time and susceptible to an infinite amount of post-mortem violence to follow. And part of that violence is the fact that we are moved to only feel sympathy towards it, to just indulge ourselves. As Sontag wrote of the psychological process of feeling sympathy towards the suffering of others, so far as we feel sympathy, we feel we are not accomplices to what caused the suffering. Our sympathy proclaims our innocence as well as our impotence. To that extent, it can be, for all our good intentions, an impertinent, if not inappropriate, response. To set aside the sympathy we extend to others beset by war and murderous politics for a reflection on how our privileges are located on the same map as their suffering and may, in ways we might prefer not to imagine, be linked to their suffering, as the wealth of some may imply the destitution of others, is a task for which the painful, stirring images supply only an initial spark. As I stated before, Pure reflects a hunger for chaos and suffering that is nascent in our society and attitudes in a myriad of ways. Recognizing that is a step towards many unsavory realizations about our nature and standing in the world, in the social ladder, and how we are transposed into the pain of others in many ways. To feel sympathy for pain is only to further muffle this realization, to take a step towards a blissful denial and deluded assurance that we are not in accordance with this violence because we feel a thing that feels like it alleviates pain, but really only presses a separate wound. To read Pure, then, is to brutalize entirely. There is an inescapable quality to the way we participate in pain and suffering when reading it, no matter how we try to skew it in our minds. To bear witness, or to recoil, or to proclaim that we cannot possibly see ourselves in it. Every path we choose to approach pure with carries with it an implication, a lingering bad taste that we simply cannot escape the violence and depravity that it represents. It could be said then that Sotos has crafted here a work that ensnares us because it is so in tune with all of the abject clutter that we are much more comfortable convincing ourselves that we have wholly tossed aside. However, if there is anything, any virtue at all, that can be granted to this thing, it is that its very existence lays witness to the fact that we are never pure, we're never clean, and we are always complicit in pain in some muted and ghost-like way. So in conclusion, yeah, fuck this thing. I don't like it. I don't recommend it. Nobody should read this. It's fucked up and Sotos is a nasty little goblin. However, as I hope to have shown in this, whatever you want to call it, therapy session, is that even the things we dislike, the things we cannot bear, the things we'd like to say we want nothing to do with, can still speak volumes of truth about ourselves. And therefore they are important to at least keep in the periphery of our minds. It's a good thing, I think, to remind ourselves that we are not pure. Okay, I'll stop using that word now. Thank you so much to all of the stray souls that stuck around for the entirety of this thing. If you have made it all the way to the end and have absolutely nothing to add to this conversation, leave me a comment with the eyes emoji just to prove that you have the appropriate 1,000-yard stare after listening to me babble on for however long. I would of course like to thank all of my supporters over on Patreon for their incredible contributions. Please believe me when I say your contributions keep me motivated and focused towards delivering completely unhinged content like this. I'm incredibly humbled and amazed by all of the support that has already been gathered up over there. And of course, if anyone watching would like to join and gain access to some exclusive videos and updates from the Plagued by Visions realm, the link is always in the description. And of course, thank you to absolutely everyone watching, liking, commenting, all that stuff. Let me know if you have read any Sotos. Let me know which of his works impacted you the most. Have you read Pure? What did you think of it? Do you need a shower? I know I do. I know I do. But the stains don't come off. They're inside. They're inside, and they're always there when I close my eyes, and it's like they're in the back of my brain where I can't reach them. Anyway, thank you all so much. You're all amazing. I hope you're all well. Continue to stay safe, and I will see you in hell, probably. Goodbye.